Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and we're taking a look today at the iPhone 12 Pro. This, of course, is the latest flagship from Apple, and I went with the smaller of the two sizes just because I like this size and form factor. And we're going to be taking a closer look at this new phone, what it's all about, and whether or not it's worth upgrading to in just a few seconds here. But I do want to let you know, in the interest of full disclosure, that I paid for this with my own funds. All the opinions you're about to hear are my own. No one is paying for this review, nor has anyone reviewed or approved what you're about to see before it was uploaded. So let's get into it now and see what this new phone is all about. Now, of course, this being a flagship iPhone, you're paying flagship prices. These start at $1,000 and quickly escalate upward from there. I went with the 256 gigabyte model, and this one was $1,100, but I do get some money back for trading in last year's phone, which I'll be doing a little later this week. Now, this is available in two different sizes. I have the 6.1-inch version here. There is also a 6.7-inch version called the Max, and that one will have, of course, a larger screen, but it also has a larger camera sensor, and I think that might make a big deal for people that are really into photography on their phones. That larger sensor will have larger pixels, and it will be able to work better in lower light, and I think you'll have overall better image quality than what you'll get out of this one. But as you'll see in a few minutes, the cameras on this phone, like many Apple phones, are really good, and I think you're not giving up all that much going with the smaller version if you like the smaller size. But if you're serious about photography, I think going for the larger unit makes a lot of sense. Now, there's also a non-Pro version of this phone available in the same size, 6.1 inches, but it lacks a lot of features that the Pro edition has, and I'll go through some of those differences as we work our way through the hardware overview. There's also now an iPhone 12 mini that has a 5.4-inch display, but it'll give you a lot of the same computational power that the larger ones have. So if you really like a smaller phone, there's an option for you there too. So there's a lot of choices this year if you are into iPhones, and of course the SE is still available on the low end of the spectrum. Now, the Pro edition here is super fancy. It's got a really nice stainless steel band. They've gotten away from the curved design they've been running with for the last couple of years and kind of reverted back to this flat-facing design similar to the iPhone 4 and 4S. I kind of like it. It's retro but new, and of course the stainless steel looks really nice, although it does pick up a lot of fingerprints. On the back here, you've got your frosted glass like before, so you want to be careful not to break the front or the back. And I highly recommend getting Apple Care on these phones because they're very expensive to replace if you break them. And Apple Care gives you some breaks on the cost of replacement, although you're paying a couple $100 up front for that right. On the back here, you've got your wireless charger, so you can pop it into any Qi-compatible charger, and that's how I typically charge my phones. It also supports a new Apple technology called MagSafe, which will securely attach a charger to the back of the device along with some other accessories. But of course, those items are not in the box. You're going to be paying extra for that. Also missing in the box is a charger. So you do get a charging cable, the USB-C to Lightning cable, but no AC charger. You have to pay extra for that. And they also stopped supplying earbuds with the phone as well. So you get nothing but the charging cable in the box, unlike last year where you got the charger and the earbuds and paid the same amount of money. So Apple is clearly getting a little bit more margin out of these phones because they're charging you the same price for less stuff. Now, just like last year's iPhone Pro, you've got 3 cameras on the back here. The other iPhone 12 only has 2. This one has a telephoto lens, which is lacking on the regular iPhone 12, and then it's got the ultra-wide and the standard lens. I'm going to show you some image samples out of this one in a few minutes. Now, the Pro here also has another sensor that is not on prior phones or the other iPhone 12, and that is a LiDAR sensor. And this is used to gauge the depth of a scene, and this could be useful for the portrait mode portion of the camera to figure out exactly where objects are in space, but it can also be used for augmented reality and other stuff. And again, that's a unique feature here to the iPhone 12 Pro. Now, the weight on this one is 6.6 ounces or 189 grams. The Max version of the phone is a bit heavier at 8 ounces or 228 grams. The build quality is spectacular. It feels super solid. You're definitely getting what you're paying for on the build quality side of things, but of course, mine will soon be wrapped in a case hiding all of its pretty features here. Now, the display is equally nice, as they always are on these Apple phones. The points per inch on both the Pro editions is 460, so that means that the Max has a slightly higher resolution than this one does, but because it is on a larger display, your points per inch are pretty much the same. Looks nice, super sharp, but pretty much in line with prior editions of the iPhone 11 Pro. Now, the brightness on this goes up to 800 nits, but it can burst itself to 1200 when you're playing back some of the HDR video. Apparently, the other iPhone 12 can also go to that 1200 nits when playing back video, but its brightness level can only be set to about 625. So day-to-day usage, this is the brighter display, although it does have the same resolution as the lower price model. Now, Apple makes their own processors for their phones, and these new iPhone 12s, both the Pro and the regular, have the new A14 chip. The Pro editions, though, have more RAM, 6 gigabytes of RAM versus 4 gigabytes on the other iPhone 12. That does make a difference for some of the video processing and maybe a few other apps that might come down the line. So if you are someone that's a heavy power user of your mobile phone, you always want to get one with more RAM, and that's why I would probably choose the Pro over the regular one. It is relatively waterproof. It's IP68 rated, so if you were to drop it in a small body of water or something, it should be okay, but I wouldn't recommend going diving with it or something like that without a specialized case. Now, the iPhone 12 and 12 Pro support 5G technology. No doubt you've been hearing all the hype about that, but you really need to keep your expectations in check on 5G, because the reality is, for most people, it's not going to make that much of a difference even if you have it available in your area. Now, there are two types of 5G, sub-6 and ultra-wideband. These phones support both technologies. The faster of the two is ultra-wideband, which will use this antenna here on the side of the phone, and that's what's going to get you those gigabit speeds. But that requires a ton of infrastructure to be installed, and for the most part, the only places where you're really going to see this ultra-wideband technology will be very densely populated areas or stadiums and other things where you've got a lot of people piled into one place. And of course, right now, during the pandemic, we're not having all that much of that going on. So I wouldn't hold your breath for gigabit speeds out of your 5G service anytime soon. And the other thing with ultra-wideband is that it doesn't penetrate into buildings. So when you're inside, you're going to likely be on a sub-6 5G network. Now, I drove all over my area looking for 5G service. Verizon Wireless just turned on a bunch of their nationwide 5G in my region, and that's running with the sub-6 technology. But not once did this phone turn over to 5G, even when I was in an area of the map that had that service supposedly activated. And the reality there is that once you're on one of those 5G sub-6 towers, you're probably not going to see all that much of a difference between the speeds that you're getting on 4G LTE now. But you might see more reliable performance given that the new sub-6 technology can support higher capacities. Now, if you want to try out 5G and you know you've got it where you are, my suggestion is to go into the voice and data settings on your phone and go over to your 5G option here and set it to on. And the reason is that if it's on auto, it will not turn onto a 5G network unless you really are asking for a lot of data. So by default, it will mostly stay in 4G mode, and Apple is doing that to preserve battery life. But if you really want the best and get the 5G all the time, you're going to want to turn that on, and just know you'll probably see a battery hit when you're using the 5G service. And on a side note, this phone has been giving me a lot of trouble on the Verizon network locally here. On more than a few occasions, it has dropped its cellular connection and it wouldn't restore it until I turned the phone off and turned it back on again. This has happened now 3 or 4 times in the same places. So I'm not sure if there's some work that Verizon's doing on their towers that's causing this, but it's been something noticeable since I upgraded here to the 12 Pro, and I'm assuming those things will get rectified as firmware updates and network improvements come down the line. But right now, it's not been a good experience on the Verizon network. Now again, you've got 3 cameras built into the iPhone 11 Pro. The regular 12 just has 2. The lens that you pick up on the Pro Edition is the telephoto lens here, as you can see. And then, of course, you've got the standard lens, and then you've got the ultra-wide. I really like the ultra-wide quite a bit. It does have a nice 120-degree field of view. It's largely the same as last year's version, so you get pretty much the same quality image as what you'll see here. This is a 2.4 aperture lens, 12 megapixels, and you can do a lot of cool stuff with these ultra-wide lenses, and it's nice to see this on both editions of the phone. Now, last year I had a lot of praise for the 1x standard lens on the 11 Pro. That was running at a nice and wide 1.8 aperture. They've improved it for this year. It's now at a 1.6, and the images really do look nice out of this lens. Nicer a little bit perhaps than last year, although it's kind of a marginal improvement in most cases. But it looks great. Nice color here. It's not too overly saturated. Here's another shot where you can see some nice detail here from some pumpkins on the front porch there. All in really, really good quality out of that standard lens, and I think this is the same lens you'll have on the regular 12 as well. What's nice about having this 1.6 aperture is that you have a very shallow depth of field, so you get natural blurring without the need to use the portrait mode all the time. And this is a really nice way to shoot because you don't have to worry about some of the computational stuff getting mixed up. You're going to get natural bokeh here, and it looks spectacular. Lots of nice detail here too, as you can see. And this is all just handheld stuff, really good. And what's also nice is that they've made some improvements on the low light. Now, this was outside with just a little bit of light from my front porch and a street lamp across the street. This was much darker to my eyes than what you see here in the scene. And as you can see, although it is a little bit on the noisy side, you are pulling out a lot of color and detail that I was impressed with for a low light handheld shot. I did find, though, that if you're trying to shoot pictures of people in dark environments like this, you're going to want to have them be very, very still. So despite all the computational wizardry going on with these cameras, there still is some need to prevent movement in low light conditions because you do have to run these exposures for a long period of time. But on stationary objects here, even in a dimly lit room, lots of detail. Again, just really good stuff here out of the standard lens on the iPhone Pro 12 here. All good. This shot was one in a very dark room, just getting a little bit of light from the hallway. This is the same shot we did on the Pixel 5 review I did a few weeks ago. And this looks pretty good too. Lots of good detail here, lots of good color. The one difference I've seen in the way that Apple handles this shot versus Google is that they will give you a little bit more graininess on the Apple phones versus the Google phones. They tend to get a little softer on the Google side of things. Apple opts for a sharper but noisier, grainier picture. But both look pretty good here and pull out a lot of good detail. And this is a little bit better than what I saw out of last year's 11 Pro. Now, the 12 Pro has a telephoto lens, which is unique to the Pro line. It's not on the other iPhone 12 models. Now, the smaller phone that I have has a 2.0 aperture camera for the telephoto lens, but the Max edition has a 2.2 aperture lens, but the Max has a larger sensor, so I don't think it's going to matter so much that we have a slightly wider aperture on the smaller phone, given that the sensor is larger on the other one. It's kind of an even trade here. And when you're out in good light with some decent sunlight, things are good here. Nice sharp images, good exposure, nice little natural bokeh here as well. Not as good perhaps as the 1.6 on the standard lens, but still pretty nice without having to jump into portrait mode. Indoors, I would probably still opt for using the standard lens. You can see this image is a little bit softer because she was moving around quite a bit. So I would suggest pulling up that standard lens and just walking a little closer to your subject. But when you've got something still here, you shouldn't have too many issues indoors with the slightly slower lens on the telephoto. Now, of course, you also get portrait mode, which has been on the iPhone for a while now. Like last year's 11 Pro, you can choose between the 1x lens or the 2x lens for your portrait photos, and those are now assisted by the LiDAR system. I didn't, though, see much of a big difference in the quality of the portrait mode photos, primarily because they've been so good for so long. So here's a shot of my daughters making some pizza. This was a decently lit photo, and you can see it did a nice job pulling them out of the background here. Even the hair did pretty well. It does try to soften it up a bit, so it looks pretty natural there. So I was pleased with the image that we got out of the portrait mode for people. And it can also do inanimate objects pretty nicely as well here. So you can see this really ugly looking pumpkin was pulled out nicely from the background there. Most of these I shot, by the way, with the 1x lens just because I like to have that faster aperture at my disposal. Here's a shot of my dog. Again, a really nice job here. A lot of times these portrait mode photos struggle with animals, and this one was able to pull her out nicely and cleanly, and I was very happy with the results of that image. It really drew her eyes out too. Look how sharp those eyes look there. So great shot out of the portrait mode camera. And under lower light conditions, I found the 12 Pro does slightly better with portrait mode. You do have to make sure your subjects hold still, which is often hard for a 4-year-old to do like mine here. So the image is a little bit soft. It did take a couple of tries here to get her to hold still long enough to get the shot to work. One thing that I noticed though, like many of the other portrait mode photos we've looked at with my 4-year-old here, the inside of her pigtail is often misinterpreted by the algorithm. So you can see here the wheels of this toy are not blurred out, but they are on the other side of her pigtail. So it's still not perfect yet, but you can make some adjustments to the blur later when you're editing the photo. But it was fun to see an improvement there, and I think the LiDAR sensor is helping with that. We've got a couple of other images here. This one is a portrait mode photo shot outside, and you can see there's kind of a glow around the tree here because it had a very hard time with all of the sharp edges of these needles, and it kind of treated them like hair and just kind of softened them all up. So this is where, again, you probably want to shoot on that 1.6 lens and use the natural bokeh, just given that it had a hard time finding the end of the tree and the beginning of the background. So be aware of that. But again, you can always adjust these later on. Now the front camera also does a nice job both in portrait mode and regular shots. The front camera is also 12 megapixels running at 2.2 for its aperture, and it's nice and sharp. Nice dynamic range here, as you can see, and it very nicely pulls out the detail. This has its own depth sensor because remember, we're working with the little sensor on the top of the phone for Face ID, so it's able to pick out the person and know where the background is to blur things out. So all in, I think you're going to get a good image for selfies like you will out of the back cameras. Now, video on the new phone has improved dramatically, not because they've improved the resolution or frame rate. It's still pretty much the same as what they had on the prior version, but it can now color grade your videos automatically with Dolby Vision HDR while you're shooting them. And that's a feature that the Pro brings to 4K 60 video shooting, and it looks pretty remarkable. And again, I can't show you what it looks like because this is a standard dynamic range video that I'm recording right now. But you'll see here as I'm playing back this video, it looks pretty bright. And the reason is that the HDR instructions are bringing some portions of the screen much brighter and other portions darker. There's more colors that it can work with, and the images just look better and remarkably better than they did on the prior version of the iPhone. This is an iPhone 11 video shot at the exact same time. It is darker, there's less detail in the clouds. This looks so much better, and unfortunately I can't give you a good idea as to what this looks like because my cameras simply can't handle the dynamic range that the phone does. The problem though with this new video mode is that the videos really only look good on the phone itself. I've tried to play them back on my OLED TV upstairs using the Apple TV, and unfortunately it does not enable Dolby Vision for the playback of those videos at the time I'm recording this video. It is applying a generic HDR to it, so my TV is switching into HDR mode, but not Dolby Vision mode, where there's a lot of precise instructions as to how to light the scene. And hopefully they make some improvements to the Apple TV so that you can actually appreciate this video on something other than your phone. Now, when you're done shooting the video and you go to export it, the phone will look at what you're trying to send the video to, and what it will do is convert that HDR video to a standard dynamic range video for uploading to Facebook and any other service that doesn't support this Dolby Vision format. So this is what it looks like after it converts it into a standard dynamic range file. Not bad. This was shot at 4K 60 and now it's being played back at 1080p 30. That jump you just saw there was the lens switching from the 1x to the 2x telephoto. All three lenses on the back and the one on the front can shoot 4K 60, so you get a lot of options for how to shoot your video. It looks fine, but it looks so much better on the iPhone screen, and it's killing me that I can't get it to look as nice on my fancy OLED TV upstairs. And I'm hoping again that Apple TV will eventually support whatever Dolby Vision format the phone is using. But still, the video looks good even when you get it back down into its standard dynamic range. This particular shot looks awesome on the phone screen and just doesn't look as good after it's done processing and exporting. You can see the dynamic range here, but you really have to see it on this screen to really appreciate it. And the front-facing camera is also a great video shooter. Again, goes up to 4K 60, it supports the HDR modes, and it just looks spectacular. So every camera here is going to deliver a very nice image. And like prior editions of the iPhone, you've got decent stabilization on it. Not perfect, but pretty good. This is the standard lens that you see here. It has an optical stabilizer on that lens. The telephoto lens here also has an optical stabilizer along with Apple's own stabilization. You can see a little bit of vibration from my feet there. The ultra-wide lens does not have an optical stabilization built in, but it does, of course, make use of some digital stabilization. And overall, it's going to be a decent video shooting platform like many of the other iPhones have been over the years. And I'm really looking forward to figuring out some new ways I can work with the HDR video. It really does look great. But again, I can't do much more than watch it on the phone screen itself at the moment. Now, the performance on the phone feels pretty much the same as it did before when you're just using it. So games run fine on here, as you can see. This one's called Genshin Impact, which is kind of a Zelda Breath of the Wild clone. Lots of fun. It looks great on here, but it runs pretty much the same as it did on my prior phone and also on my wife's 10S. You're not going to see a lot of difference in performance when you're just using the phone. But where the performance enhancements and upgrades are coming are things that you don't typically see, like the color grading of the 4K video in real time and that sort of stuff. We're going to see a lot more specialized hardware for specific tasks as we move forward with mobile phones. It's going to be less noticeable when you're browsing the web or doing games or that sort of thing. But still, you're going to have the best experience on this phone because it is the top of the line. And if developers do decide to take advantage of its unique features, you'll certainly be able to get those onto the games and apps that you're loading on the phone. Now, we did run a couple of benchmarks on the phone earlier, and I wanted to run through those real quick because there are some interesting results that we got out of it. So the first one is the 3D Mark Slingshot test, and that is a gaming benchmark. And here the iPhone 12 Pro on that test actually did not do as well as the iPhone 11 Pro. Typically, when we go from one iPhone to the next, we do see a performance improvement. But here we really didn't see one. Now, Slingshot is an older benchmark, so we also ran the brand new Wildlife benchmark. That's a multi-platform test. And initially, that wasn't better either, but they updated the benchmark this week, and suddenly the phone was doing better than its predecessor did. So as you can see on our chart here, we got a score of 8,640 at 51 frames per second versus 7,450 at 44 frames per second. And that's the kind of incremental performance improvement that I would expect from one generation to the next. Not bad. But you can see that the A12X in the iPad Pro that I bought a couple of years ago is still much more powerful, at least on that test. Now, the battery life here on the new phone is pretty much the same as it was on my 11 Pro. I'm not noticing any differences here. I'm about a week into my ownership now, and this is my daily driver phone now, and all has been good. And again, it feels about the same as what I had out of my other phone. I'm not getting halfway through the day and worrying about how much charge I got left. It's been good. Your mileage, of course, will vary based on what you do. In my experience, when I'm shooting a lot of video on the phone, that is eating into the battery a lot more than just the casual phone call and Twitter check and all the other little checks you might do on your phone throughout the day. So by and large, I think if you have good battery life with your iPhone now, this will largely be the same. I do think, though, that if you are using 5G, that might make an impact here, given that it's a new technology and it's not completely optimized and efficient yet in hardware. So that might be a little bit of a battery drainer, especially given that Apple is putting in some automation to figure out when you really need the 5G versus not. And that leads me to think that perhaps a 5G all the time might give you a little less battery performance. Now, one thing that I do is I have Qi chargers all over the house. Pretty much anywhere I sit, there's a Qi charger. So I'm usually just putting my phone down on one of those Qi chargers to give it a little top up throughout the day. But I've been purposely not doing that for the last week just to see how the phone does. And this has been working out just fine. So now the question I've been getting from all of my friends and family this week is whether or not it's worth upgrading to an iPhone 12. And the answer really comes down to what phone you're currently using. I've been using an 11 Pro for the last year. I've been very satisfied with that experience, and I'm not seeing anything here that's a groundbreaking upgrade over the prior version. Yes, the HDR video is super cool. It looks beautiful on the screen, but I can't make much use of it in any other place than the phone's screen at the moment. The 5G is cool to have, but again, I don't have any 5G service, so I'm not going to get much benefit from that either. And for those reasons, it feels very much an incremental upgrade and a very small upgrade from my prior phone. But if I had an iPhone 6S or a 7, this is a huge upgrade. You're getting a much better camera, you're getting a much faster phone, a much nicer OLED display. There's a lot of things here that are not on some of the older ones, which makes this a very big upgrade. So like we've seen with prior Apple phones, each year to the next is very incremental. But when you skip a couple of years, it's a much bigger change to go from an older phone to a newer one. And I think if you are hitting the 3 or 4 year mark on your phone, you're going to be very satisfied with this one. But if you've only had your phone for a year or two, it'll be less of a big jump up, but still a nice incremental upgrade nonetheless. That's going to do it for now. Until next time, this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.
This channel is brought to you by the Lon.TV supporters, including gold level supporters Tom Albrecht, Chris Allegretta, Mike Patterson, and Bill Pomerantz. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to lon.tv/support to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit lon.tv/s.